Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second session in our three-part series on modern methods of construction. My name is Matt Holman. I'm a partner here at G&T in our project management division. I'm joined by Oliver Booth, who, as usual, joined me to assist. He is a partner in our cost management division. Just a technical reminder before we crack on with the session. The buttons at the bottom of your screen will help you join the chat. So ask questions as we go along and get involved. Also, there'll be poll questions along the way, so don't forget to use those buttons to get involved with our poll questions and answer those questions. Here's our agenda in front of us. So Ollie will get involved with introducing our panel shortly. We'll get straight into the panel Q&A. We've got a lot to cover today. We're looking at procurement, building control, town planning, government incentives, sustainability, and much more. And like I said earlier, we've got our usual poll questions, so make sure you get involved with those as well. So that's enough from me for now. Ollie, over to you to introduce our panel.
Great stuff. Good morning, Matt, and welcome back, everyone, listening in on this incredibly hot Tuesday morning here in the UK. And just a thought on that, but if extreme weather conditions across the globe continue in the future, it might drive the UK and other countries further towards adopting off-site modern methods of construction, especially if our climates continue to radically change and become even more extreme. However, it also serves as a reminder of how some of our international neighbours have in the past and present adapted their methods of construction to work in more challenging weather conditions and erect buildings in a manner more suited to their local environments. Worth noting that our construction methods are always evolving, and that is the way it should always be. So welcome to session 2 of 3 in our G&T Modern Methods of Construction series on the topic of planning and procurement. As Matt just said, some of the issues we'll discuss today are things such as, does procuring MMC technical solutions require a different approach than perhaps maybe do a traditional project? What stakeholders might need to consider when looking to adopt MMC solutions? Does choosing an MMC solution result in a lack of competition? Are clients forced to single source? And if so, is this necessarily a bad thing? How are building controls seeing MMC being implemented? What is the role of planning authorities and government? And are some of those leading the way? And of course, what role has MMC got to play in sustainability and the circular economy? As always, we've tried to find experts in their fields with varied knowledge and experience from across the industry. And our panelists today are as follows. We welcome back Mark Punsak. He is Assistant District Surveyor at City of London. Mark is both a Chartered Structural Engineer and Chartered Building Control Surveyor. Other organisations and groups he is involved with include being Vice Chair for the Institution of Structural Engineers Health and Safety Panel, part of the industry stakeholder group for the Structural Timber Association's Mass Timber Systems, and a member of the Future Building Control Working Group. Just some of the large iconic commercial building projects he's been involved with include 20 Fenchurch Street, the Cheese Grater, the Scalpel, and the Broadgate development. And next to Peter Goring, Technical Director for Mace Tech. Currently, Peter is Technical Director for Mace Tech, leading a drive from construction to production, reducing waste and carbon, and finding smarter delivery solutions. Peter joined Mace with 30 years' experience in civil and structural engineering contracting, and he became a chartered engineer in 1987. Under Peter's direction, the company developed specialist services in post-tension concrete frames and precast hybrid construction. Some research projects with British universities and other European research establishments he's been involved with include developments in self-compacting concrete, management of waste resources, the practical use of recycled materials in structural concrete, sustainability and low heat cement concrete. And next to Rory Bergen. He is partner at HTA Design LLP, who leads the Sustainable Futures team. Rory leads the Sustainable Futures team within the company, a specialist unit he set up in 2007, delivering a variety of sustainable design services, including off-site construction research, construction lifecycle assessment, energy performance, daylighting and overheating analysis. An advocate for innovation and sustainability, he co-authored a book on volumetric housing published by Reed Press in 2020, entitled The Modular Housing Handbook. Rory has been involved in the design of buildings constructed using off-site methods for 2 decades now, including projects in Hong Kong and UK, and including the tallest volumetric modular buildings in the world. He's a regular panelist at conferences on sustainable design and off-site construction, and he chairs a CLC working group on aggregating the demand for off-site construction. Rory has led HTA's involvement in numerous off-site construction activities, including the Innovate UK project to develop a DFMA toolkit launched in 2022, and ModCons, an EU-funded FP7 project that investigated the use of volumetric construction across Europe. And next, we welcome Tim Utterley, Construction Commercial Director at JRL Caledonian Modular Limited. JRL are a very well-known and established concrete frame and groundwork specialist and own several other successful subsidiaries. They bought Caledonian Modular, which you may have seen in the press, one of the country's largest modular house builders, earlier this year. Tim has 20 years experience in modular industry and has been with Caledonian since 2015. For the last 10 years, his roles include design, project and contracts management, commercial management, and as a commercial director. Just some of his key clients include the Department for Education, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Defence and the NHS. And next we welcome Helen Cuthbert, a founding director of Planning Potential. Helen has over 25 years experience in the planning consultancy, promoting development and influencing policy guidance to maximise clarity and ease its application. Helen was elected to the Fellowship of the Royal Town Planning Institute, that's the RTPI, on the 12th of May 2021. As a founding director of Planning Potential, she continues to extend and apply her considerable practical experience. Helen has worked on a wide variety of projects across the industry, on a variety of industry sectors, but she has particularly strong background in retail, leisure and residential development. She has acted as an expert witness at many public inquiries dealing with policy, design and amenity issues. And finally, our very own Graham Knight, Director of Project Management at Gardner & Theobald LLP. Graham is director at the company, working as a project manager on a major film studio development just north of London. Prior to joining GTMS, he worked for Mace on a circa 1.2 billion new prisons program for the Ministry of Justice as alliance lead. This program relied heavily on MMC and the off-site manufacturing, and is an exemplar use of the FAC1 alliancing form of contract to deliver 4 new prisons with pre-manufactured value KPIs for overall program of circa 70%. Before working with Mace and GTMS, Graham had significant involvement in the prisons estate transformation program with Kier and designers Bride and Wood, where rapid prototyping of MMC components and design for manufacture and assembly approach was taken to develop a potential MMC design solution for future prison deployment. So as always, Matt, I and the G&T team are incredibly grateful to our panelists for their time today and in warming up for this session. And we're hugely excited to hear their views, insights and experience. Matt, back to you.
Thanks, Ollie, and welcome panelists. Thank you so much for your time. Great to have you on board. We'll get straight into it. Let's start off with a bit of a warm-up in terms of procurement. So are there any differences in terms of procurement and tendering when using MMC compared to more traditional methods? I might get straight to it. Peter, would you like to take that first question?
Yeah, I think essentially the procurement routes are not dissimilar to what most people expect, but there are some subtle nuances around it in terms of the sourcing and the opportunities, and I'm sure we'll come to some of those later on. I mean, one thing that we have the biggest perception of getting across is actually getting the client understanding as to what we're doing, and we tend to do it slightly differently to others in that we don't have a factory, but we rely on our existing supply chain. So we always say what we're actually doing is a method, not a system. As soon as people start talking MMC, they start talking systems and method. In reality, we're just doing construction away from the site and then bringing it to the site. So I think, generally it's a fairly subtle change, but it does have some impact, which I'm sure we'll discuss later on. And the biggest change for us, being essentially a construction management company, is where we started, has actually been the internal procurement route, where we're buying more product now than we are actually subcontract services. That's been quite a shift of the whole mentality of some of our people, internal people. So it's this mental shift more than anything else. The procurement is largely the same, tendering is largely the same. It's just a shift from where we are to where we were, should I say, to where we really want to be.
Okay, Rory, anything to add to that?
I suppose that it does vary when you move up the categories. So when you get to category 1, we would say that the sooner you find the partner you're going to work with, the better. So, don't leave it to the end of stage 3 when you've got, a completed design. Involve the manufacturer at stage 2 if possible. I think our most successful projects have been successful because we engaged with the manufacturing at that stage, and we probably knew that we were going to build it using category 1 systems from that stage. I think the difficulties we've had have been new entrants into the market from the client side who weren't sure which direction they were going to go. So, they sort of pit say, category one against traditional contracting, and then can't quite decide for themselves which is the best way to go. And yes, people are concerned by the fact that there might be only 2 or 3 category one manufacturers in the market. So I think that's probably something we'll discuss in more detail later on. But for me, it's starting early is the crucial issue.
Okay, so that's one key consideration. So Peter, the other key considerations in taking a project this way?
I think Rory's captured it really well there. I think the earlier you can get the engagement, the better it is. Often, as a structural engineer myself and designer, I often see structural designs, and you can see why they've been designed that way. But the reality is that even in all forms of construction, the designer is designing for the lowest common denominator. So actually, the earlier you get involved with the contractor to get improved, to get an insight into the methodology, the earlier you'll actually get, the better design you'll get out of it. So I think Rory's exactly right there, that the earlier you can engage with people, the better it's going to be. And I think that sort of leads it for me from a design point of view. And we all would love to be involved in getting stage 2 or stage 2 to stage 3 designs, which is the best place to be. It is possible to wind back from stage 4. It's going to incur some additional costs and possibly some time issues in it. But I think, as Roy says, it's best early engagement. I think that the biggest thing for me from a procurement point of view is actually with this early supply chain engagement is when we're including facades on structures and bathroom pods and services, it's actually bringing those elements of design forward as well. And so the leading on some of the longer term leading items is the key to us to get everything working smoothly.
Cool. Tim, let's bring you in on that, if I may. You're on mute, Tim.
First crime of the day. Yeah, Peter's absolutely right. I mean, one of the key, I come at this from a contractor's perspective, volumetric modular contractor's perspective. And we see lots of projects come across our desk that have been taken to a stage 3 or 4 design. And they come and say, can you deliver this modular? And it's just too late in the game then to try and repack that as a modular solution. So there's some key considerations from our point of view. When you come to an offsite manufacturer for particularly improved quality, less offsite works, but key really is the driver in program. It's a fast and efficient way to get the building to site and fast return to market. So to save that or to procure that benefit in the program, we have to go about the design in a different way, and you have to respect the different manufacturers' systems. And I know Peter mentioned systems, but that is an important point. Different manufacturers have different elements of systems that they'd like to stick to. And if you use a manufacturer's system, you're already sort of leapfrogging the initial design stages of manufacturing, where that building and that system already has prepared detailing, connectivity, structural loadings, all of those sorts of important things that take time to resolve in a traditional construction process. So you can, as I say, respect the system that the manufacturers have got. And so getting into early design phase, and Peter touched on it as well here as well, things like lead times for windows, for furniture fit out, some key M&E components, internal doors, all the procurements lead times have stretched over the last 12, 18 months and put more focus on program. And so it's key that we're making those fundamental design decisions very early on in the project. Because as we operate as a factory manufacturer of modules, when we press go on the manufacturing date, all of those decisions need to have been made. The design freeze must be much earlier than in a traditional construction project. And then you've got to allow for the lead time for that product to hit the factory to be installed on that date of manufacturing. So there's a lot more upfront. It's much more intensive upfront in terms of the design and the procurement process. And really, clients and the people in the front end of these projects need to be aware of that and be capable and set up to be able to make those decisions quickly.
Great, thanks, Tim. Graham, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would probably look at this also as a consideration from the perspective of applying modern methods of construction and components across programs. So you may not just have one individual project or a discrete project. So the work with the Ministry of Justice I've done in the past, we had to do a quite extensive capacity mapping exercise, right down to availability of the raw materials that go into individual elements, the availability of those elements that go into a component, a sort of pre-manufactured component that would be assembled on site. And I think it's it's actually factoring in that supply chain capacity assessment and mapping, especially when you're looking at the peak across multiple projects, really. So I think we've had to do that in the past, and that's an important consideration from a procurement standpoint to factor in early on.
It's like a supply chain management piece almost.
Yeah,
that's cool. Interesting. Okay. So would there be an impact on traditional procurement routes, i.e. traditional D&B construction management, if using MMC? We partly answered that, but just to emphasize that a bit more, Tim, do you just want to?
Yeah, I think Peter touched on it in sort of the opening welcome side of the discussion, but we typically have used, I mean, in 20 years of these types of projects working for a modular contractor, I would say 90% of those projects have been delivered using a JCT D&B or an NEC3 now 4 type of contract. So we're well versed in the modular industry in using those types of D&B contracts. I mean, we've used more bespoke ones for things, major projects like Olympics and Hinkley Point, those sorts of things. But typically, they can be delivered using that methodology. I think what's key, and which I'm touching on, sort of the early engagement again, is that the sort of the old days of the single stage tender. Let's just get a design, get a planning permission agreed, and send that out single stage. Doesn't particularly doesn't allow you to get the benefits out of modular, because you're starting at from a almost resolved design too late in the process. I think there's been some excellent work done, and Rory and HTA have been involved in some of these things with Caledonia in the past. But certainly things people like the DFE using the schools program, the MMC framework. We're working with the MOD currently on SLA living accommodation projects for the MOD, and equally with the MOJ with the prison estates. We're seeing a much more wider sort of engagement of modular contractors early on in the process to design a concept, modules that are configured, that can be reusable, and that's the important thing when you get to a modular manufacturer. It's about volume and repeatability, and they're embracing that, understanding that, and driving projects through a design process using, say, like the PCSA contract to get early contractor engagement, and then drive into a D&B contract thereafter. So typically, those are the typical routes that we're seeing across a lot of the projects that we've carried out over the last few years.
Thanks, Tim. Graham, I mean, it sounds like there needs to be some sort of pipeline. It's more than just one project in some instances. It seems to be like a more partnering type approach, maybe.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the pipeline aspect is very important when you're looking for your supply chain to invest heavily in perhaps their manufacturing facilities to meet the demand for those components. I also think, it opens up the possibility of different forms of contract to support that earlier engagement, sort of in particular on the prison estate transformation program with the MOJ. We were utilizing a PPC 2000 partnering agreement. And I think that at the time was probably seen as the sort of most collaborative way of engaging supply chain early and contractors at that stage. But also more recently, the FAC1 alliancing form of contract was quite interesting. And that acts as a kind of umbrella contract, let's say, where everybody can be appointed on an even footing in a way, from consultants to contractors to what would traditionally be a subcontractor potentially, but would be in this case a manufacturer, a modular manufacturer or a component manufacturer. And the client kind of has that ability to have this sort of bespoke approach to kind of engendering that collaboration at an early stage. I think you can then, underneath that, still deliver under an NEC form of contract or a JCT design and build contract for each individual project, but you've actually procured not just services like you may under a PCSA, but critically for delivery on this scale, early orders, early works orders, and securing orders from supply chain, and that does have to allow you to commit financially a little sooner, and maybe you might not have achieved full cost certainty to some extent on other elements, but you have the mechanism within those umbrella forms of contract to place the order for those elements early and secure that and build up your stock of components that you might require to meet your peaks within the assembly program on site. So yeah, I don't think it needs to be any different from a traditional route, but I think you need to consider a mechanism for allowing that early engagement.
Okay, thank you. So Peter, just in terms of that, we've heard a lot there already. So some of the benefits of maybe taking an alternative procurement approach, some of the key benefits of this?
Yeah, I think as a contractor, all contractors are basically economic pragmatists and wouldn't do it if there weren't benefits coming out of it. So I think the biggest thing that we're seeing is the improvements in program time. Notwithstanding the issues we discussed earlier about leading and long-term items, but what we're finding by doing the off-site manufacturing, we're getting our fit out much closer to our structure and install. So we're seeing sort of 10, 12, 18-week improvements in residential programs. And that really comes to the fore in programs like, we're still seeing quite a lot of student accommodation, where hitting the July deadline of any academic year is fundamentally important. And I think that's the key one for us. And with the other ones, really, we're finding far fewer deliveries to site, around 40% fewer deliveries of HGVs. And what we didn't anticipate entirely was the complete collapse in the LCVs, where we don't have the white vans arriving with a few disc cutters and spacer blocks and bits and pieces. There's still some work to do on waste of the general activities, and it's the sort of thing that Tim, I'm sure, has got covered because they're more covered off-site. But generally, we're finding better waste. So I think overall that's about right. And when it comes to cost, we're pretty much cost neutral. And the reason behind that is some of the work we're doing at the minute is costing us a little bit more money to achieve the direct cost. But the indirect cost of the up to 30% shorter timescales means that our prelim reductions are offsetting against the direct cost. So we're seeing improving. It can only get better with practice, and we're still sort of not seeing the full impact on our bottom line just yet. But the more you do it, the better it'll be.
Overall, so you've got reduced program time and efficiency, but generally you've got more certainty, I guess, as a result.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that 75% of projects in London overrun. Some of them might even be most jobs, but but what we're finding here is we've actually handed over one project 9 weeks before PC, and so it's that's program certainty, which is really important, I think, to not just us but our clients too.
Tim, anything to add on that?
I think it's a pretty good summary from Peter. To be fair, programs obviously the key one, but the benefits of modular construction are that off-site delivery of product. You're taking a lot of that activity away from these sites, which are often constrained and difficult to access. So the factory becomes a neutral environment for doing that work. We're delivering modules that are fully fitted out, decorated, furniture fit out, completed rooms onto sites. So that's a key one. Gives you the program benefits, the reduction of works on site. When you're using a system that's a tried and tested sort of proven technology, you can almost ensure your sort of regulatory compliance. Things like acoustics and fire that are all worked out and tested as part of the system come as part of the product. So there's lots of benefits to modular. I think I said Peter's touched on most of those. So
that's helpful. Well, I guess there's a health and safety benefit as well, given that there's less activity on site and it's more controlled in a more controlled environment. So, okay, Ollie, let's get our first poll question done. And whilst let you carry on with that, and I might ask another question whilst you're getting the answers.
Okay, so obviously this data is super important to inform our white paper at the end and any summary papers. But so with everything you've heard this morning on the discussion, would you consider alternative procurement models for future projects? Are you prepared to move away from the more traditional ways of procuring things, even though, as you've heard, that perhaps there's different cash flows, earlier commitment to products, perhaps front loading elements of the design, different contracts and stuff might be, would you consider alternative procurement models for future projects? Is that a yes? Is that a flat rate no? Is that just not really sure at the moment, don't know, or would you rather abstain from answering? But this kind of stuff's really important for the data and everything we pulled towards the end.
Thanks, Lloyd. And whilst our audience are contemplating that question, there's a good question that's coming from John Curran, actually, which I'll give our panelists a chance to answer whilst we're collating the answers on that. And the question is, how do you balance a client's interest in keeping upfront costs low at stage 2 and 3, maybe, with the manufacturers need to be compensated for its investment of time in the project. Do manufacturers view some of that upfront cost as non-compensated sales and marketing expense? Tim, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, well, we're a business and we have a strong team of design and upfront pre-construction people within the business. We offer a service similar to sort of a traditional sort of architect and consultant practice under the D&B banner. So you're procuring through the contractor in the same way as you would be to a certain extent through a traditional route, albeit there's always a need for some external consultants depending on complexities of projects. So, I mean, what we tend to look at is we tend to look at putting a cost plan together that includes those upfront elements of cost. And whilst there is a requirement to commit to cost and requirement to commit to some design fees upfront, I don't see that as any different from a traditional market, if I'm honest. And if you're committed to the project and you're engaging with a contractor to get from, through a PCSA project, we have to have commitment. We have to have foresight for factory manufacturing slots. We have to book those slots in the factory and get commitment to those. We can't really commit to a space and all of the staff and the overhead that runs with that without that certainty on the front end. So I think for everybody involved, that's the right thing to do, and it gives us the benefit of foresight. And I don't believe that's a significant change from the sort of fees that would be paid to consultants in a traditional setup.
Great, thanks, Tim. Ollie, does that give me enough time to get our answers in?
Yeah, well, look, the really positive thing here, Matt, is that 83% of people say yes, and I wonder what that would have been 5-10 years ago, and I wonder where that will be in 5-10 years from now. It feels that the industry is getting there and is ready to embrace changing things up for the betterment. Nobody said no. 7% kind of abstained, if you like, and 10% kind of not applicable to what they're doing. But yeah, I think that's overwhelmingly positive.
Great. I want to come back to supplier competition, and I'm going to pick that up towards the end. I'll probably go to Peter and Rory on that, but I just want to get Mark in on the conversation now. So we'll move on to building control. So Mark, what are you seeing from a building control perspective when it comes to implementing MMC on projects?
So I guess I'm seeing that is becoming slightly more prevalent, and it'll depend on the market. So I'm quite London focused and commercial focused, and what I'm seeing is a real takeoff in things like WC pods and things like that, but less so in the systems for buildings. Plenty of precast and bits and bobs like that, but in other markets people will be getting different types of projects, and building control and the project teams are sort of learning how to deal with that. And I think it's really important to understand that the regulations, the laws are no different to how you make the building. It's the outcome that's important. But the guidance that goes alongside that, so the approved documents, that they're supposed to be for some common types of building, common types of buildings in government parlance. And what that means is that if we're going to drastically change the way we build things, the guidance that we have may not be appropriate. Doesn't mean it isn't, but it needs to be thought about. So what's really important if we have an MMC project is that people stop and think about what guidance am I using, and is it actually appropriate for my methodology? Do I need to think again? Do I need to engineer it from a different perspective? And I think that as this starts to get more traction, that those sorts of questions ought to be asked a bit more by building control. And perhaps if it becomes all totally mainstream, then the guidance will adapt to that, and we won't need to ask those questions. But that's where we are at the moment.
So in that essence, so how do you think how project teams should engage with you, Mark, and other building control officers? How do you think that should work going forward with an MMC project? Yeah,
so I mean, everybody's sort of mentioned how important it is for early engagement, and I think the same goes with building control. Really, projects at the moment, engage building control too late in the process, in my view, and it's even more critical with an offsite or an MMC sort of project that the building control is brought along early, because you need to get that certainty of what you're doing before you start pressing go on manufacture. So you need building control input at that point. I think also as well that if you take construction away from the site environment where building control might have been and looking at certain elements and put that in a factory environment, need to consider that building control may need to be going to that factory to look at the components and the things that go into the building. So it's somewhat different to a widget type thing like a bolt, perhaps, where you can kind of have that tested and certified and you understand what that is. If the product that is being manufactured is more bespoke, then that is something that building control ought to be looking at. So that needs to be factored in. And we've done that really well on a few projects in the city where we've been off to various places, precast works and WC fabrication yards and things, and seen them there and got the confidence as a building control authority that what's going into that building is going to be compliant.
Fantastic, thanks Mark, that's a good summary. Let's touch on planning. I'm keen to bring Helen into discussion as well, so thanks for your patience, Helen. So Helen, in your experience, are local authorities talking about MMC at planning stage? And if so, do you expect this to change or develop in the future?
They are talking about it, but in a rather reluctant and resistant way, I would suggest. Mainly because I think, as Mark said, the guidance doesn't necessarily give a much clear steer in planning. So our Bible is the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, and it doesn't make any reference to modern methods of construction. It has appeared in the National Design Guidance. There's one word referred to it in, all the pages on that. So it's a bit like we are dealing with local authorities who don't really know, haven't had enough experience of this type of construction to be confident that they can encourage it. Interestingly, Rory's probably going to be able to talk about this better, and I don't know if you were involved in the Croydon Towers, but obviously that was one where the council were in favour of modern methods of construction. So I would just basically say there's a reluctance at local authority level, mainly to do with lack of clear guidance from government. Okay,
Rory, do you want to come in on that?
I would say it's sort of a lack of knowledge. Yeah, that what tends to happen is people hear the word offsite and they don't really understand what it means, and they worry about finished quality in particular and appearance. So but in our experience, the best way to approach this is to take councillors and officers to visit a completed project, preferably one that's similar in nature to the project that's in proposal, and reassure them, because the projects that we've delivered, you can't tell whether it's off-site or not. They don't look like different buildings, and we go to quite a lot of trouble to make sure that that's the case. So I think once you've reassured them, then actually the picture switches. So they welcome, once you've got over one building and they've seen it delivered effectively and they're happy with the results, then they're keen from then on, because of all the other benefits that we've heard, lower disruption of traffic, less noise, less pollution, etc. So, and quicker delivery. Local authorities are interested in quick delivery. So seeing projects delivered early is great news for them, because they want to see perhaps more activity back in town centres, more housing around busy transport nodes, and so on. Or sometimes projects that have languished, have been through several cycles of planning and are just desperate to see the project delivered. So I think the offsite industry has a great part to play, but you do have to bring them along with you.
So it's like a fear of the unknown because of lack of knowledge, and perhaps the aesthetic concern is one that can be addressed just by, as you say, making people feel more comfortable with it. Mark, is there anything you've got anything to add on that, just from a city perspective, maybe?
Yeah. So whilst I'm not a planner, I do work in the planning and development department in the city, and I think that the planners, our planners, are relatively enlightened, if there's such a thing, but they are not directly encouraging MMC, but what they're really interested in is whole life carbon. And I think that if offsite manufacture can contribute to reductions in construction waste and all those other things that contribute towards that beneficial carbon picture, they'd be really keen.
Right, thanks for that. So Helen, in your experience, of the local authorities that you've mentioned there, or haven't mentioned, but are there any that are leading the way? Are there any that you think are particularly enlightened and are aware of MMC and the benefits of it to their neighbourhoods, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's as Rory said, once they're familiar with it, then they see the benefits, then they're really encouraging. So Croydon would be one, having had direct experience, I would say, and they're fairly sort of proactive planning team. So I think that's Croydon. Also, I've seen Lewisham be quite, sorry, this is very London centric as well. No. I'm sorry about that, but Lewisham as well. But then I have had difficulties both in Southwark and Camden. And it's this point about quality and aesthetics sort of trumping the other benefits that modern methods of construction can bring. So the point around local distinctiveness, they're like, well, how can you have local distinctiveness if this is a factory-built product?
So their mindset's like a cookie cutter type thing, as opposed to it actually being a bespoke product that's just manufactured. Right.
It's that falling into that trap of design and build not being as good as architecturally designed schemes, that old classic. So that seems to be the approach that lots of local authorities take. The other one I would just flag is that quite often local authorities want a local employment condition on their planning permissions to suggest that, or to require that there's local apprentices, there's local supply chains, so that the benefits of the build are felt locally. And obviously that tends to fly in the face of off-site construction systems. So that's an interesting one.
I guess where other people might come on that is that it can assist the levelling up agenda, whereby you can, it's sort of on a national level, it can help in a different way as opposed to local level.
Yeah, but I mean, again, if you've got your own policies trying to support local employment, it doesn't really help. So no. Without being too negative, I think I would certainly agree that the sustainability piece, the bit around whole life carbon, is far more critical than and the sort of the weighing up of the convincing that the aesthetics will be fine, but that the whole life carbon point is much more critical. But as I say, it's that balance between which trumps which in terms of a planning decision.
Cool. Okay, Graham, you got your hand up.
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to pick up on something Helen said, because it's quite interesting in terms of the employment aspects of things. So I think with the experience of the MOJ on the Prison Estate Transformation Programme and New Prison Programme, those employment opportunities were kind of seen as a key element of their social value responsibility. It's not necessarily directly sustainability, but it's part of the wider sort of CSR agenda. And I think an opportunity there was utilising ex-offenders, or in fact current offenders coming to the end of their sentences, to actually assemble these components on site. So with an element of the skill being taken from one place to some extent and being put in a factory where these components are assembled, although there are clearly some employment opportunities there as well. We had key performance indicators that was a requirement for each of the contractors to meet in terms of providing 15 sustainable employment positions to ex-offenders on each construction site, and then that increases over time. But you're utilising ex-offenders or current offenders with through release on temporary license to actually upskill them, develop a pipeline of future skilled resource, because you're upskilling them as sort of throughout the construction, and then they have a job at the end of it as well. So I think there's an important aspect that we can look to from that program to try and apply elsewhere.
Point. Yeah, interesting point. Thank you. So just on that, on government and particularly on incentives. So Rory, do you think that there's a need for incentives? What are the current incentives in adopting MMC? I mean, are there tax reliefs available and the like?
No, but the encouragement I think that we see in the market coming by government is through the Homes England development program. So there's a pre-manufactured value component to most, if not all of the bids in the current bidding round. I think it's 55% PMV is the minimum threshold. So that's driving a lot of closed panel timber frame systems and pods and panels and so on in that market. I think the progress that has been made already in the market hasn't come about because of government incentives or subsidies. It's come about because of market demand. So the hotel industry has embraced this. The student accommodation industry has embraced it. We're seeing the private rental sector embracing it. We've built several projects now which are build to rent projects funded by institutional investment, who see all these benefits. They really get the sustainability benefits. They love the certainty. They're not perhaps quite as cost focused, but it's about the value in the long term that's interesting to them, because they're buying something that they're going to need to resell and resell and resell many times over the life of the project. So it's quite a different attitude. So for me, I suppose making it easier for the institutional investment sector to thrive and bring in the ESG goals, that is actually pushing buildings further than policy, which is really interesting. I've never been at a point in my career where the financing and investment sector was saying to us, you need to do better, better than regulation, better than policy. So there's a kind of a brilliant competitiveness coming in from outside, which is not government backed at all. But I think government could be doing more to encourage both frameworks and pipeline. So we still have as we've heard, the single stage tendering thing going on, which is from my perspective pretty antithetical to the development of MMC. You need a sort of a development pipeline, multiple projects, a program of development, and that will support factories to grow and develop, because the factories can see the work that they're going to need to eat into, and they can go to the investment market and get cash to expand. So it's pipeline for me is the thing. How do we give the factories pipeline?
So Helen, is there anything to add on the role government can play other than helping with that pipeline that Rory mentions? Is there anything you think that we could?
Well, I think we could do with them tipping the balance in favour of MMC in policy documents. So we are waiting for a new MPPF. As I say, at the moment it's silent on it. I see Rory smile. We've been waiting for it for a while. So it's in a bit of as with the government at the minute, there's not a lot happening in terms of policy making, but that would really help. So this is when you've got that balance, and you can then point to a policy that says, look, you should be encouraging this. This should tip the balance in favour of development. I think that's really quite critical. The other thing I don't know, and maybe the panel do, is how much are the volume house builders shifting their pipeline into MMC? Because I think that's where you get, as I say, that sort of tipping balance tipping point once they are doing it, and then the local authorities feel comfortable with it because they're familiar with it. I think we could see a really, really big change in the amount of MMC coming through.
Okay, interesting. Okay, well that's helpful. That's in fact, Ollie, if you're on our second poll question that you're about to put up, we probably need a few more answers given what Rory and but anyway, people agree with Rory and Helen, they can tick the other box maybe. So I'll let you relay the question.
Yeah, I think that the trouble here is, Matt, is that everyone would like to tick every single one of these and other, but unfortunately you can only tick one. So from what you've heard, how could government and other agencies best support the increased uptake of MMC? So obviously we're just trying to single out one of these. If we had a genie and we're basically trying to, one wish, which of these do you think would make the greatest difference? And as I say, this is important information. It not only feeds the white paper, but also it enables when this, the video is sent on and sent on and sent on, hopefully it will get in front of the kind of people that can make the difference. Nikki Gavron was on one of our previous ones. She's a big supporter of these sessions, and we need to get your views in front of as many people as possible. So please, if you could tick one of those, and we'll give you the answers as soon as possible.
Well, whilst people are answering that, I'm going to ask a question relating to sustainability, because for us, at least, Ollie, when we've been looking at this, and together with our Mass Timber Forum, sustainability has been a key drive at G&T, and MMC we see as a key player in that. So I guess a question for Peter and for Rory. Peter, if you'd like to answer first, is will the drive for net zero impact the adoption of MMC, and how? Circular economy, reuse, carbon reduction, etc. How do you see that? For Peter first.
Yeah, we're sort of seeing one thing is the certainty again in terms of the net zero. One thing that we as an industry we've never been particularly good at is having a benchmark for what the embodied carbon is. So there's various things been set, but actually measuring that accurately on sites has been quite difficult. You can't get an EPD for ready-mix concrete at the minute as an example, so you don't actually know what the embodied carbon is. What we do know though from precasting and doing our process off-site is we actually can measure it a lot more accurately. So that gives us the benchmark and it gives us the opportunity to improve. And as we then work with design teams, we can then, one of the best ways of saving carbon is actually to put less in your buildings. So by actually then looking at this and developing it through, it helps to drive the amount of carbon down. It also helps us to focus on where effectively the engine's running hot, if you like, where sort of aluminium going to particular sources, hydro, for example, which has got less than 10% of the embodied carbon in that than any other product. Similarly, electric arc furnace steel, all these sort of issues, we can actually then work and control those within our methodology. Whereas if we're out to a general supply chain, we've just got a specification that just either specifies concrete or specifies steel, and it tends not to specify the sourcing. So within doing that, we can. We're also looking within our methodology. We've got a high-rise product for residential. We've also developed a cassette-based system for longer span commercial offices, and part of the logic behind that is, can we actually build that for dismantling and circular economy later on? So I think it's always going to be net zero, I think, for construction in the short to medium term. We're not going to get to zero because of the amount of work that goes into it, but actually if we can drive it towards reducing the carbon, especially in the body carbon of the building, and look at the operational energy, then I think we're driving a different agenda.
Rory, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything about getting to zero is about optimization. So some of the things we've already talked about. So looking at the project early, involving manufacturing early, thinking about materials early. I think we're probably going to see, if we have a functioning government anytime soon, we're probably going to see the introduction of embodied energy and carbon into building regulations. There's a drive for Part Z, and certainly in the research that we've done, using category 1 volumetric, like with steel components, reduces the embodied carbon by about 40%. So it tends to fluctuate depending on the building type, and that's still building the building using relatively normal materials, but it's just carefully engineered and optimized, I think, in a way that a lot of traditional design and build isn't. And it takes a lot of concrete out of the process, and concrete is one of the most carbon intensive materials available to us. So unfortunately, because of both government's sort of speed of action or lack of action, and Grenfell, we're still at a position where there isn't enough guidance and certainty around the use of off-site construction systems vis-a-vis fire. So going back to one of your earlier questions, what could government do? It could do some work on MMC and fire. And actually, I know the BRE are doing some research on this at the moment. So hopefully within the next 12 months or so, we will see some better guidance come out to the market on the use of particularly category 2 panel systems and pod systems vis-a-vis fire. The category 1 manufacturers, because they control everything, can deal with certification and warranties in a way that the smaller manufacturers find very difficult.
Right.
So yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful. Ollie, do you want to give us our result on the poll?
Yeah, absolutely, Matt. Okay, so a whopping 41% believe regulation and/or legislation. 19% applying, and conditioning MMC, which is an interesting one. Subsidies 15%, tax relief 15%. So it's quite a spread there, Matt. I suppose it's probably hard to make a choice. And when we wrote this question together, we didn't really know what people would go for. So probably a bit of everything is probably the actual answer we get here. But interesting, regulation and legislation seems to be the overwhelming winner there.
That does prove that it's live. Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm just going to go back to one of the things we touched on but didn't really expand on was one of the perceptions in the industry is that there's a lack of supplier competition in the market, which could lead to single sourcing to create a challenge for some projects. And what are your thoughts on this perception and how could this be overcome? So Peter, I'll probably come to you first on that, particularly as you're you've not got a factory, but you're doing MMC in a methodology way, if that makes sense. If you could take that question.
Yeah, it's often a difficult area. That's going back to the early bit about procurement, about getting engaged with a contractor early on, and the commitments that means and the costs associated with it. So there is this perception certainly, and to a degree, it's not entirely inaccurate. However, the way our methodology is around working with our existing supply chain. So although we control our methodology and our assembly, we actually then source all of our products from a range of suppliers. So actually, we shift that single source down to, instead of tendering for with Mace and our competitors, we actually use our supply chain to drill that down a little bit. So we're getting our components from different people. So we're finding a much wider range of people who are able to manufacture within what we call our construction to production school of thought. So we're drilling that down a little bit rather than actually going to a single source. So although they might negotiate with us, we're actually giving that competitive tension further down the market.
Interesting. Rory, anything to add?
I think it's you have to look carefully at the manufacturing type and system type. So if you look at, say, category 1 volumetric, there's a small number of people, but they're all pretty they're pretty large organizations. So it wouldn't be fair to compare them to, say, some of the small panel manufacturers that make up category 2. So there's a world of difference, I think, between a small category 2 panel manufacturer and a category 1 volumetric manufacturer who is dealing with the entire building process, and really, is quite similar in scale and nature to some of the tier 2 or tier 3 D&B contractors. So if you're going to take a risk, approach, you'd look at some of the category 2 or 3 contractors at the moment, and you say, well, they're not particularly safe right now. So it's about where does the risk lie, and actually doing a proper risk assessment. So I'm not convinced that some of the category 1 manufacturers are more risky than some of the contractors. I just don't see that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for feeding into that one. That was good. So I like to, with our maths team before, and indeed with this series that we're doing now, we do like to do lessons learned and perhaps look into international areas. But in this arena, what other industries can we perhaps learn from in the world of construction? How can we learn from, I don't know, automobile manufacturing or whatever it may be? Is there anything we can learn from other industries and bring in? Does anyone want to come in on that one?
I think the logistics industry is kind of interesting, because a lot of what we're doing is about logistics. It's about getting products from one place to another, and I think there's been a discussion recently about having a better approach to, say, London, for example. So instead of everybody having to figure out, how you bring product into London, where you store it, you need a buffer zone of material so that you can deal with traffic delays and so on by having more product near to the site. So a more of a centralized and focused approach to that, I think, would be a good thing.
Okay.
Matt, I'd agree with Rory on that as well. I think we often refer to our methodology as an optimized logistical solution. So it is a matter of how you bring components to site, and sometimes you can actually do them off site, and it costs nearly as much to deliver them to site. So actually, is that the right thing to do? So I think that's certainly a good point from that point of view. And I quite dislike the metaphors are often used about the car industry, because I think it's far less like a car industry than a Formula One, because effectively what you're doing is pulling together components. Every building really is a multi-user prototype. So every building is going to be slightly different, whereas cars are very much sort of wrong analogy. And I think that certain things work very well for factories, and like what Tim's doing with Caledonian, it clearly works, but there's quite a sweet spot between getting things through. So I think you have to be quite agile, which certainly car manufacturers aren't. They sort of have a very much R&D led production, which takes several years to get there, and then they mass manufacture them. So I think
I'm so glad you raised that. I'm so glad you raised that, Peter, because we often compare things to that industry, and I'm so glad you raised that, because I'm with you in that it's every building's unique in a sense. So yeah, I agree. Graham, you got your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. So I think just picking up on that point around different types of manufacturing, I suppose. I think in the past we've worked with the Manufacturing Technology Centre to carry out some assessments in terms of the offsite fabrication and assembly of sort of componentized MMC elements, and that was actually quite an interesting process. They sort of consulted on a almost like a production line setup, so they would normally probably offer their services to the automotive industry and things like that, but what they actually did come up with was a manufacturing readiness assessment that was quite useful to apply to a new some new MMC elements that we were looking to kind of deploy. And I think that was quite an interesting approach to it. They did actually manage to save some production space requirements as a result of coming up with some different ideas of how you would have a production line type environment for these particular components. It won't work for everything, but by saving that space, it saved the setup costs and time in finding more manufacturing space as well. So I think that was quite useful exercise from that I'd learned from maybe not another industry, but like an outside source, a different consultant.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we're nearly there for time. So just any final thoughts, really? Anyone got a final thought before?
I guess if I may, Matt, just picking up on Peter's point about the car analogy. I think you can look at it two ways. I think if you look at buildings as completely bespoke products or bespoke solutions, you're kind of missing what the modular and offsite manufacturing process is about. It's about repeatability, it's about volume. And where we succeed as a business typically is in the sort of things like the student accommodation or accommodation markets. But that's been diversified into things like the schools frameworks, where the DFEs embrace this componentized system, where you do have a much more similar to a car. You have an engineered product, and the school themselves can change the color of the walls, color of the carpets, the outside cladding, but fundamentally what's underneath the skin is exactly the same as the building we delivered to a site somewhere else. So there's horses for courses here. If you're into it's maybe a residential type building that must be an architectural statement, then MMC or volumetric modular might be more difficult to achieve that. But there's lots of more utilitarian scope within the building market that modular is perfect for.
Thanks. Cool. Okay. We're just about any more just before we. No. Okay. Great. Well, thank you, panelists. That was fantastic. Really good session. Next time we'll be looking at on-site challenges and buildability as the third and final part of our MMC series. Our audience, you should have already received calendar invites for that. It's Tuesday the 16th of August. If you haven't, drop us a line and we will send you that invite. If you have any questions in advance that you want to help shape that session, then please let us know and we'll add those into shaping the session for you. There was a couple of questions that came in during that session that we didn't have time to answer that we will pick up as part of our white paper at the end of the series. But I think that is it. And thank you all for your time. Thank you for listening in, and we'll get the recording out to your colleagues as soon as we can, because there's a number of people that couldn't make it for whatever reason this morning, mainly dropping kids off at school. So we will get that recording out as soon as we can. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.